Hello, this is David Edwards. Thank you for joining me on the fourth day of Holy Week, Maundy Thursday, as we talk about paintings in the events leading up to Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. We'll be talking about paintings concerning the Last Supper, Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and his arrest. I'd like to begin by reading a passage in the Bible about the Last Supper. It's from Matthew chapter 26, verses 20 through 29. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12. And while they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." They were very sad and began to say to him one after the other, "Surely you don't mean me, Lord." Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, "Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi." Jesus answered, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." The first painting that we're looking at today is called The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci, dating to 1498. It is the most iconic image of the Last Supper, and it's supposed to depict the most dramatic moment of that evening when the disciples say, "Is it I, Lord?" The painting was painted on a wall in a dining hall of a monastery in Milan, Italy. It took da Vinci 3 years to paint it. The head of the monastery complained that da Vinci was taking too much time. So da Vinci, reportedly, painted Judas to resemble the complainer. There are lots of references to the Trinity in this painting. Jesus' outstretched hands form a triangle, with his head as one point of the triangle and his two hands as the other 2 points. There are 3 openings at the rear of the room. The disciples are in groups of 3. Judas is lower than any other figure in the painting. He's also the only one in shadow. He's knocked over a cellar of salt, which means bad luck even today. He clutches a money bag, of course, because he was the treasurer of the group of disciples, supposedly. And he reaches for the same cup as Jesus. Other symbols include Peter with a knife, because he uses it later during the arrest of Jesus to slice off the ear of the priest's servant in the Garden of Gethsemane. And Thomas points with a finger, which he used after the resurrection to confirm the wound in Jesus' side. It took 21 years, from 1978 to 1999, to restore this badly faded and damaged painting, but it is certainly the most revered painting of the Last Supper. The next painting is similar to da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper. It's called The First Eucharist by Juan de Juanes, dating to 1560. This composition, as I said, was similar to da Vinci's, except for the artist emphasizes the round Eucharist being held up by Jesus. Halos are inscribed with Latin names of the disciples around each of the heads of the 11 disciples in this picture. Only Judas does not have a halo. He's the disciple dressed in yellow to the far right. His name is carved on the seat of the bench he sits on. He wears yellow, the color of envy in the Middle Ages. He clutches a money bag, and he's often shown with red hair in Middle Ages paintings that depict Judas, for whatever reason. In the foreground is a large bowl and a pitcher, used later to wash the disciples' feet. The third painting about the Last Supper that I'd like to show you is entitled The Last Supper by Peter Paul Rubens, and it dates to 1631. Rubens is one of the greatest Flemish painters of the 17th century. The disciples and Jesus are assembled around a smaller square table, popular in Flemish art, as opposed to the long stretched-out tables that we saw in the previous two paintings. The architectural feature to the right, the top right corner of the painting, is similar to an altar in later churches where the Eucharist will be celebrated. So there's a reference there to the Catholic Mass. All the disciples except Judas look intently at Jesus as he blesses the bread. Judas looks out at the viewer in a haunting manner, as if he's about to do something he will regret. And there's a dog gnawing a bone beneath his feet, which represents greed or coveting. The fourth painting about the Last Supper is called Jesus Washing Peter's Feet by Ford Madox Brown, and it dates to 1856. This painting shows a uniquely low, sort of compressed perspective, perhaps suggestive of Jesus' level of humility or servanthood, as if we were on the floor with Jesus at the time of the foot washing, and everything else is sort of compressed near the top. The artist originally depicted Jesus only clad in a towel around his waist, as stated in John's Gospel. But the painting did not sell with Jesus only clad in a towel around his waist, so the painter painted him fully clothed in this version. Only then was the painting accepted and popular. The disciples react in different ways of unbelief, especially Peter, and Judas is at the far left with money bag in hand, dressed in yellow, and he is pulling off his sandals too. The next paintings are of the Garden of Gethsemane and Jesus' arrest, and I'd like to read a passage from Luke chapter 22, verses 39 through 53. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he rose from prayer and went back to the disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." While he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus answered, "No more of this," and he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns." The next painting is entitled Gethsemane by Karl Bloch, and it dates to 1873. This is one of Bloch's 21 paintings in the life of Christ. And in the last two evenings or days, I've also talked about other paintings by Karl Bloch. He was a Danish painter of the 19th century. This painting shows great contrasts, deep darkness, and brilliant light and colors in contrast to the dark, flowing robes and a gnarled olive tree, and the soulful looks on both faces of the angel and Jesus. Jesus praying in the garden is in 3 Gospels, but the angel sent to comfort Jesus is only mentioned in Luke's Gospel. It's one of the most human paintings of Jesus, and a very comforting one, but at the same time, a very soulful one. The most iconic painting of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane was painted by Heinrich Hoffmann in 1890. This is probably the most reproduced painting of Jesus in the world. It's an iconic vision of Jesus in every respect. The German painter Hoffmann was known for his scenes in the life of Jesus, 3 of which were purchased in 1932 by John D. Rockefeller and donated to Riverside Church in New York City. This painting was the only object saved from a collector's home that was destroyed by fire as a result of the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. It shows Jesus illuminated by a ray of light coming from heaven and a halo around, or an aura around his head, as he looks up tenderly to God with his hands crossed on a rock in the Garden of Gethsemane as he bows in prayer. Again, Jesus is in a blue and red robe, which seems to be the most popular colors for Jesus' robe in any of the paintings that I've shown in the last 4 days. This, too, is a very haunting, humanistic painting of Jesus that shows great grief or fear, but final acceptance to Jesus' fate by himself in the garden. The next painting is called The Taking of Christ by the Italian 17th century painter Caravaggio that we've spoken of several times in the last 3 to 4 days. It dates to 1602. This is a painting that shows a man holding a half-hidden lantern off the screen so it illuminates the scene. The main subject of the scene is Judas kissing Jesus, but it is off-center. What is central to the painting is the polished metal-clad arm of the arresting guard, meant to reflect or mirror each viewer of the painting, you and I, as we participate in the betrayal of Jesus. Despite the idea that a temple guard would have worn a suit of armor that's more accurate for the Middle Ages, didn't bother the people who were looking at these paintings. And the painters often tried to take biblical scenes and place them in contemporary context. By the 18th century, the painting was thought to have disappeared until it was just recently rediscovered in a monastery in Dublin, Ireland in 1993. The last painting for Thursday's series of paintings is called Conscience by the Russian painter Nikolai Gay from 1891. This is a realist Russian painter of the late 19th century who depicts a haunting, darkened scene in Gethsemane of Judas left behind after his betrayal as Jesus is being led off to the far right. It's a very starkly illuminated painting, which of course Judas is the main subject, but it is a haunting type of depiction of Judas perhaps saying to himself, "What have I done?" And certainly things didn't turn out quite what he had expected at the arrest. And then, of course, you see in the far right, Jesus being led barely perceivable by the guards. And that's where I'd like to leave this discussion of paintings for Maundy Thursday. And tomorrow we'll talk about paintings concerning Peter's denial of Jesus, the trial, then the crucifixion and burial. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope to see you on Friday.